right, we are live with another episode. How you doing, folks? How you guys doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for asking. Hope everyone's well, winning at life. Wish everyone all success and happiness.
Everyone, take a
We
look at
always say.
Bobby A. Well,
Oh
what is his
boy.
costume? He is an FBI agent
I
extraordinaire.
am when we get into the conspiratorial side of it. I got my Fox Mulder badge on.
There we
FBI.
go.
Let's have it
God.
right. When I was Fox Mulder for Halloween, best Halloween costume of all time. I dare anyone to beat that one. Because I
All
had
right.
Scully with me. You've seen the photos.
I have indeed. I have indeed.
And so a quick story. My week was pretty shitty, actually, stressful,
It's
because the fat cats were in town. You know what I'm saying? Like checking out. You know when they do the impromptu visit, and
Okay.
no one knows. Like they just show up unannounced, and they're checking out the warehouse and the store too. So then a couple of days afterwards, everyone is all in a tizzy, like, what's going on? Oh, you got to do this. Like, make sure everything is laser lined and all this.
Oh,
It's one of those where they show up unannounced, they see how the store really is. And then for the next couple of days, everyone is freaking out. But my man, the Teamster, the union, the truck driver, yesterday morning or yesterday afternoonish, late morning, early afternoon, he comes in and I know him because I see him all the time on Mondays and Thursdays, and I was like, "Why are you always so happy, man?" Because I was in a foul mood, and it's like he's always smiling, joking, like chirping, talking smack. Like he's a union guy, yeah. He's a truck driver, and he goes, "Keep your mind clear. Don't think about everything. And when you're not dwelling, everything becomes funny." And I was like, what? He dropped some wisdom on me right there. Look at that line. The direct quote was, when you're not thinking about anything, everything becomes funny. So I think what he means is your mind is clear and you're always looking for the comedy and humor and like the joy of life. And he's not dwelling on all the stress. And I was like, this guy just dropped some serious knowledge on me. And he's like a late 50s, early 60s truck driver. That guy's the man, dude. He changed my week. So now I'm in a good mood. I was like, that guy, he landed it. Shout out Jeremy, my guy, you know.
There you go. There you go. Dude, man, sometimes I bet you that guy has.
Yeah.
It took him many years to learn that lesson.
Exactly.
He might
well
have
said.
just saved
Well
you
said.
20 years of stress.
Yeah, he was like, don't stress over anything, man. Just find the humor and the happiness and everything.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you for bestowing that on us and all the audience.
Yeah, put me in
It
a
is
good
true
mood.
though, man. It's like sometimes, it's like, I don't know about you, but when we work together,
Yeah.
sometimes when you're in the thick of it, you just start laughing at something, and like
Right,
that is
exactly.
probably the right way to react to like a lot of like those situations. Because I mean, if you start to worry, a lot of times your worry is not going to change the situation. It's not like
Yeah.
magically by worrying about it, it's somehow a knot gets unraveled. You know what I mean? Like all you can choose is like how you choose to like respond to it. Like you can choose humor, you can choose anger, you could choose worry, but humor
Yeah.
at least is going to make you feel better.
Yeah, he's a cool dude.
So thank you,
And
Jeremy.
Jeremy's the man. Shout out. And Monday night, there was some St. Patrick's Day's festivities, and Joe was right. I don't think I still have recovered from it. It's Friday. Yeah. Woo.
Well, on the term of the Irish,
We're going to be speaking of
He's a
we're going to
good-
be
yeah.
speaking about a famous Irishman, Irish American, and we have the
Yeah.
legendary Joseph Mark, our in-house historian, who's going to be kind of leading this conversation where we're going to talk about JFK. And this is
political.
kind of a fortuitous conversation since all these documents have been released and everyone on Twitter is kind of like trying to read through these documents and trying to, pull the thread and discover some new insight into JFK's assassination. But we're going to focus on JFK's life. And he lived, he didn't live the longest life, but he definitely lived a pretty
eventful one.
eventful life. So
yeah.
Joseph, where are we going to start this conversation?
I know for me, it really began last week when we
Mhm.
were. I thought we were going to hammer home a little bit more about the JFK angle, and then these documents were released. I think yesterday or Wednesday, and it just kind of hammered home. Oh, okay, this guy he's had an interesting life, and the thing that keeps popping up in my head is, what kind of world would we live in if he actually did not get assassinated? So I kind of
Mm.
asked that question to you guys. I feel like things would be drastically different, and especially more so in the 60s. But I think things would be drastically different had Kennedy not been assassinated or survived his assassination attempt. What do you guys think?
All right, so we're starting at the end of his life,
Yes.
Joe. I
Yeah.
like
We're
this.
just gonna
This is
jump.
a very directorial of you, very artistic.
Hopefully
Yeah.
not Oliver Stone like.
Yes, very Oliver Stone like. Start at the end, move to the beginning.
Mm.
What do you got, Robert?
Um, so, as someone, I know more JFK in terms of his like the persona more than his political career.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But hammer
so,
that point then, because that's important too.
yeah. So, I mean, we all know there's various documents or documentaries, excuse me, and films about him and Jackie. So I did a little bit of digging about his personal life with Jackie, but let's start with Joe Senior. He was the most
Mm-hmm.
interesting part because I didn't know anything about him. So his father, Chris, you know, I'm assuming you know more than I did. Uh, his father was like a Wall Street guy. They moved to New York, so he's from Massachusetts, but they moved to New York. He was a Wall Street guy, but he was also a Hollywood executive. He was also a producer.
Oh,
Back
interesting.
when Hollywood was really in New York.
Correct. Yeah. So the connections that were built there and the relationships you forge when you're in those two worlds. So he was in the finance world and he was in the film industry. So that was interesting. I didn't know maybe that bleeds into the personality that Kennedy became, and a lot of what I was watching and reading was Joe developed or it was like an incubation period for all of his male it was the male children that, oh, you could do whatever you want, womanize, you're allowed to do whatever you want. It was a very like chauvinistic household where the men were dominant. Patriarchal is the word I was looking for. It's a very patriarchal household, so that kind of shaped the character of, at least behind the scenes, of John F. Kennedy. Joe, am I wrong in that? That's
No,
correct.
you're
Yeah.
not wrong at all. Although I will say that is also kind of a sign of those times. Because I remember watching something about his wife, JFK's wife, Jackie
Yeah.
Bouvier. There's a similar angle too with her father, how he would be a philanderer. He would actually leave the family and womanize, and they just accepted it. They didn't really.
Yeah, that's
They
the
thought it
word.
was just a part of the time frame that they were men were going to be men. That's the idea at that time.
Yeah, like it was allowed. It was not even just allowed, it was expected. It's like, yeah, this is what I do. You can. And then the females in the Kennedy family tree, they just had to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they did. So how do you think that shaped his like political side of his because he was very likable. The reason why he got, I want to talk to you about the 1960 election too, but I'm getting too ahead of myself because it was him versus Nixon,
Mm-hmm.
and they were both like in the middle. They were both centrist,
Mm-hmm.
basically, and it just came down to charisma and
Yep.
likability.
That's what,
And Kennedy presented better on television
which
back
was
in the
the
day.
first time it was really televised too.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
think that was the whole thing with the frost of Nixon. They kind of zoomed in on that.
Yeah, he looked mean. He was
Well,
frowning.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that they had
He was
the people
sweating.
who listened to
Yeah.
Nixon. So, because some of those people are listening to the debate on the radio, and some were watching it on TV. And I think the polling audience, the ones who watched it on the radio, gave the debate to Nixon. and those who watched it on TV gave the debate to JFK.
Yeah,
And it showed how you judge things differently when you're judging by looking
that's
versus
true.
when you're judging by listening. Because when you're judging by listening, you just have what is being said and tone. And when you're watching something, handsomeness plays. And JFK was a
definitely.
youth. Well, he came across as a youthful, healthy, handsome man.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I always it was like at the beginning of when like debates on television was like mattered the most. So
I mean, it was the first, right? I mean,
it was the first
that's
one.
now
Yeah.
all how all debates are. They're
Yeah.
televised, video.
Yeah. So
To
I
piggyback with
Wait, one thing,
Joe,
which is kind of interesting though, because we're with the moving to podcasts and how in this election, podcasts played a major
interesting
part.
point.
It
Exactly.
kind of goes back to radio in a sense. Like you can see
You're
it,
right.
but podcast is like you're used to. Like more people are going to listen to it because it's longer, so they want to be able to do something and listen to it at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting. We're kind of like the pendulum is slightly. It's not the same, but slightly swinging back in that opposite direction. But go ahead, Joe.
I think with Joe Kennedy, I think his ambition kind of pushed JFK into the whole political realm. I think Joe Kennedy wanted to be a big Democratic figure, and he was kind of sidelined by Franklin Roosevelt because FDR he like pushed him all the way to the UK. He made him like a UK ambassador, um, and
Oh yeah, 1938 to 1940, he was the ambassador to the UK.
Yes.
Go ahead.
and I think Joseph Kennedy wanted to be president himself. So he kind of once he got sidelined, he figured that that was it. He wasn't going to be president, so he kind of pushed that dream onto his sons, and Jack, Robert, Ted, they all kind of like took the mantle and ran with it, and JFK was the first one up, and him traveling Europe on the behalf of his father, kind of after going to Harvard, kind of cemented, I think, his role in trying to become what his father could not be.
Yeah, so they instilled he instilled in his children, because they would say, I was reading, they would talk about it at the dinner table. It was all about like world perspectives and politics. That was every time the entire family sat down, that was the topic of discussion. So you could tell he was Big Joe was was like molding them into being politicians from the time they were little.
Yeah, I definitely think he projected his own ambitions onto his
Right.
children,
Yeah.
for sure.
Which is what a lot of parents do. Like there's a lot of parents that want their son to be an NFL football player, but they couldn't do it, so they make them practice. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, they'll
It's funny that you point that out because I didn't know JFK's back issues stemmed from playing football at Harvard. I thought it was when he served in World War II. But so that's interesting. I didn't know he had a back issue because he played football.
Yeah, that's people don't usually bring up his military background either,
Which is weird. You would think the stuff that he did in the military would be brought up. All like every politician, they talk about whenever they serve that this is what they did, and I served my
John
country.
McCain never stopped talking about it. But he was a POW. That was his.
And that's
I guarantee you,
part of his
even if he
story.
wasn't a POW, he would bring it up.
Yeah,
But it's a good point, Joe. I don't think I ever knew. If I knew it, it wasn't at the forefront of my mind that JFK was in the military.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at that time, if you went to war, everyone went to the military, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a few and far between didn't go. Elvis was in the military. But you're right. When you think of JFK, it is kind of like the smallest bullet point in his story of his military service. So maybe we can zoom in on that. So in World War II, what was his military service? Do you know, Joe?
He was in the Pacific battlefront.
He was in the Navy, right?
Yeah, he was in the Navy.
Okay.
He was like a command. a commander or some kind of like lieutenant in the Navy, where he was in the Pacific, somewhere like right above Australia. I'm forgetting the
Uh-huh.
name of the area, but he was in serving in that theater of World War II.
Okay, interesting. Which is a kind of another little, I guess, like a deviation from him because like he wasn't in the European, um, what do they call that? He wasn't in that war front, so he was in the Pacific where he
Hmm.
served,
Yeah.
which kind of gives you a different like perspective on even that war because I feel like the battles in the Pacific were so different than like what those were experiencing in like in Europe. Yeah, so
Uh,
I'm looking at his. I think he
yeah.
was also kind of like in naval intelligence. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was actually like he had a supervisory role.
Hmm.
So he had people he was commanding people under him. And there was some weird story that happened at sea. Maybe Joe knows more, but
Yeah, he was. It was at night.
there
He
was a
was.
strange thing that happened. Yeah.
It was at night. There's some Japanese destroyer
Yeah.
was like heading straight to them, and
Uh-huh.
it like completely exploded the boat that they were in. Two people like instantly died, and he had to rescue or help rescue the rest of his crew and bring them to some remote island in that area. And he was he was afraid of trying to put out an SOS to try to get the uh, the U.S. Navy to come rescue his team because he was afraid that the Japanese were lurking around and they would pretty much come in and destroy the rest of his crew. So he got lucky.
Mm.
He injured his back during that whole crash.
Uh-huh.
He re-injured his back, and he got lucky enough to bring once he brought his people onto the land to the island that there was a group of people that are already like counter um, insurgents for Australia. So he was able to send out a group of people in that island to get help before the Japanese could find out that they were there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow. So yeah,
And I'm
that's
seeing that his while he was in the Navy, his other brother died.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
I don't know where he died. I don't know if it was in Europe or also in the Pacific.
yeah, I think he died. I'm looking at it right now. It says he died in just. I think he was just in a reckless flight. He did something and crashed. They never recovered his body.
And he was apparently that son was Joseph Kennedy's like favorite son. He was like the
Yeah.
one that was going to take over, be the one to hold the mantle for the Kennedys.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's very interesting the whole idea of like legacy and like the family. Like it's not you don't see it too much now as much, but like it's a very like old idea. Like his father was trying to create like a dynasty,
Mhm.
essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. He was like
Right?
Tywin Lannister. That's exactly who he was.
Exactly. It's
No,
like
for
very
real.
very Roman.
yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
you know my life my generation is to set up these people, these children, to essentially I don't want to say infiltrate, but like create this foundation that will grow on. What's also interesting is like how many people in this family died. Like how many sons died?
Yes, the Kennedy curse.
At least three or
Well,
four, right?
Yeah.
no, JFK. I think he had three children and one died at like childbirth. So it was just really two, John Jr. and then,
No, but Joe Kennedy, he
oh
had
yeah,
at
yeah,
least three or four of his sons die,
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because
Bobby.
one died here. We see in this flight.
Yeah.
JFK he passed, and then his other
And
brother was
Bobby. Yeah.
assassinated.
yep.
Yeah.
That's you know what I mean. That's
Oh, and
crazy.
and multiple of these incidents. I'm gonna call them incidents because
Oh yeah,
we can get to the conspiratory part under some very dodgy circumstances. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
but that's a great point, Chris. I think he was Korean. He wanted the Kennedy name to be a legacy. That was Joe Senior's goal.
Oh yeah, his
Yeah.
family would be would
They
hold
would
power for
dominate
a long
American
time.
politics. Yeah, I think that's what.
So, Joe, let's kind of fast forward briefly to I want to talk about So prohibition, like let's just like hover on that for a moment, because didn't Joe Kennedy, didn't much of his financial assets come out of bootlegging?
I believe so. This part I'm not too keen on, like too aware of, but I know he had some illegal dealings, especially with the mob, and I'm pretty sure that also had to do with bootlegging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to find just that detail, because that's kind of like something that's always gets thrown at him, that like essentially that their empire was built on like, yeah, bootlegging, illegality.
But
This is what I'm seeing
I
on
feel like
Wikipedia.
around that time, a lot of people who
Yeah.
had means dabbled in some kind of illegal, like substance or something that wasn't
Yeah.
on. The, go ahead.
No, you're right, Joe. Like Chicago, New York, but Chicago, New York, Boston, and I would say Atlantic City, which is what Boardwalk Empire is about, are were all tied into like organized crime in the 20s and 30s.
But it touched like every aspect, organized crime. It touched every aspect of like American life.
Oh yeah,
So yeah,
politics. Yeah. They do it. That Boardwalk is actually a good depiction of that because they do. I don't think they focus so much on Boston. I think it was more New York, where you have what's his name. You have Luciano. You
yeah,
have who's a
Lansky, I think.
Lansky, Meyer Lansky.
And who's
That's
the
who I was
big guy
thinking.
in Chicago?
Capone.
Capone. Here we
Yeah,
Yeah,
go.
I forgot the name of the guy before Capone too.
yeah. So that was they were all they were all influencing politics as well, which is where Joe was trying to make his name.
So Joe, I want to kick it back to your original question, and I don't think I have an answer. So what do you, since you post it, what would the United States like and the world like? How do you think it would look differently if he had not been assassinated?
Yeah, this is the biggest question I've had ever since I like took an interest in Kennedy, which is like when I was a kid. I think the '60s in general would be drastically different. I don't think there would have been a counterculture. I don't think there would have been like a hippie movement. I personally think that in the United States, everything that happened after 1963 would be completely different. I think once Kennedy was assassinated, the idea of American innocence died. It went away with him.
Interesting. Can you like expand upon that? So why do you not think there would have been? Because that was your other question, was like the '60s counterculture. So the hippies, the Beat generation, kind of was part of that time period. All of this art that kind of came out of it. Why do you think if he had not been assassinated, that whole period of time would not have happened in the U.S.?
I think Kennedy was really great at inspiring hope in people
Okay.
with his speeches, and I think at that time there was a just a young group of people who thought that the world was going to be a better place after the ruins of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. They thought things were going to be better. And once he was gone, and cynicism kind of took root, and people didn't trust government anymore. People didn't trust the establishment, whatever that may be, whether it was government or non-government. People just felt that things weren't going to be the same anymore, and that they just needed to find a way to make themselves happy, and whether that was through drugs or through music or just through just being themselves or being a little different. People, Americans in general, kind of found different avenues instead of trying to look towards their leaders for a path forward.
So you think the '60s, the theme was a hopelessness, was part of the.
After the assassination, most definitely.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying like the season that inspired the hippie movement, the radicalization of the '60s was out of like a hopelessness rather
Yes.
than like a
Yes.
positivity.
Hmm.
Interesting. Okay. Um, Yeah, so you think he just would have kept people like they wouldn't have lost that they wouldn't have become hopelessness. Their optimism would have maintained and we wouldn't have seen like all of the 60s movements.
In my opinion, that without a doubt,
Cool.
I totally believe that.
Interesting. What do you
I
got,
think
Rob?
Yeah. No, I have two questions actually.
Go
So
for
he did go. My first question is, why did you become interested in Kennedy? Like, what attracted you to the family history? Number one, and number two is, to Chris's point, he went even to Europe, and in Berlin he went to see the Berlin Wall, and there was like 500,000 people watching him speak in the streets, which was I think the largest crowd that he ever spoke in front of, one of the largest crowds anyone has ever spoke of in history. 500,000 people in the streets of Berlin watching him speak. Was that just because he was such a likable, charismatic guy? Like, why did people adore him so much?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so.
Go
I'll
ahead,
start
Greg.
with the
Yeah.
second question.
Yeah.
I think one is definitely just the part of it. I think, and I wouldn't say it's a big part. I think it's a small part. Part of it is just his looks, his youthful like exuberance, just how he kind of like put himself out there as someone who's above the fray, but could still kind of understand and empathize with people who live their day to day lives.
Yeah, like a man of the people.
Yeah, but
Even though he's not of the people.
exactly. And but the most important thing for him is really just his speech, how he's able to dump really short, concise speeches that inspire people. His use of words. He might have been the best um, speech guy of his time.
Yeah, like orators.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, I would agree with that. But Chris made a good point there. It, from a man coming from just immense wealth already, he grew up in basically splitting time between New York and Cape Cod. How is he so relatable to the common person? Is it just the speaking skills?
No, it's not the speaking. I think he put himself out there to like his time in Europe. I think helped him. He got to see how Europeans lived, and that's not something that many Americans did at that time. So he got to see just the day to day lives of people in France and Germany and the UK, and he was able to just pull that and bring it back to the US. And then him seeing how people in around the Boston area lived and how people in New York lived, he was able to coalesce all those things and kind of bring that out to the people.
Yeah, wasn't he friends with? Sorry, Chris. Wasn't he
Oh, go ahead.
friends with Queen Elizabeth when she was young? He
I
was
believe
friends
so,
with her.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
were cool with each other. Yeah, yeah. I thought that was interesting too, because that gets into a whole nother level of like deep cover investigation.
He was also he was very inspired by Churchill too. So he had like this Anglophile. He's Irish, but American Irish, but he still had this like thing with the British that he really liked.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and we can get into the religion stuff too. The first Catholic president,
To
which is
answer
also
your to answer your first
yeah.
question though, to me he was like no, besides FDR, and FDR was just so further out there in terms of time frame that it was hard for me to be at my age at that time to really dig in on him. To me, Kennedy was the one who had the biggest impact, I think, on many American lives. I think he he set forward an agenda that eventually his vice president took and ran with. But I think his agenda, whether it was globally or domestically, kind of set forward the way of life that we live now. And plus, he was charismatic. he had all these he had these Hollywood like connections. He was with all these like starlets.
Hmm.
It's something that drew me to Kennedy on so many different levels. I mean, if you're into history, how could you not be?
So do you think? So I have a question. Like, do you think that Kennedy was? Because I think for a lot of people of that generation, like the people had pictures of Kennedy on their walls,
That's
right?
Yeah,
Like
nuts to
he
me.
was very
he was
popular.
an icon.
I think
Mhm.
that many people named their kids after he was assassinated, John after John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, of course.
Um, do you think he was actually a good leader, or just that like the this is the first example of like very good marketing? Because you think about it nowadays, like I would imagine like a lot like Obama. I would almost say Obama could have maybe taken like studied Kennedy and kind of used a lot of
I'm pretty
his
sure he did.
yeah, like
Yeah.
he's charismatic, kind of polished, but can also still like smoke a cigarette and hang out with the masses, even though he
Yeah,
has nothing in common with them.
he's still cool.
And same thing with Clinton too. I think Clinton fucking idolized JFK. There's like a picture of him, like a 20 something or maybe 18-year old Bill Clinton shaking JFK's hand, which is nuts to me.
Yeah, I mean it's kind. I mean, yeah, he would have been like what they strive to be. Because I'm like looking as you're talking, I'm looking at like Wikipedia, and
So to answer your question, I don't think it's marketing. I think JFK kind of grew into it. If there's one thing I've learned through like looking at his life, it's that he was never really prepared to do any of the shit that he did. But once he got into it and once he learned from his mistakes, he grew better and he learned how to make things work for him after. Like for example, like all of the stuff that happened with the Bay of Pigs, it made him distrustful of the CIA and of the Pentagon, and it made him realize that they didn't have his or the country's best interests at heart. They were really more trying to cement the empire. So he became distrust. Him and his brother became distrustful of the CIA. Versus once he was gone, Lyndon Johnson he didn't have that kind of distrust for the CIA. He took everything that they gave him for their word, and Johnson paid heavily for it.
after World War II, who was the president right after World War II?
So after World War, so FDR died in office, and
Okay,
that's pretty much when the war was winding down. I think it was his successor, Harry Truman. Harry Truman was the one that finished the war.
and then after Truman was
It
so
was Dwight
Nixon,
Eisenhower,
Dwight. Okay, and then after
and
Dwight,
Nixon was his vice president.
Hmm.
okay, and then the next one would have been Nixon.
No, Nixon. I'm sorry, Eisenhower got reelected, and then Kennedy and Nixon were vying for being Eisenhower's successor, which is 1960.
Hmm.
Okay, okay, yeah, because it's like it is interesting if you think about it. Like the American government, as we look at it now, is probably very different than what it was in the 50s and the 60s. Like, you know what I mean? It was still kind of like you said, the empire was solidifying itself through these generations.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of interesting, like what you said, like with JFK, like things I've read as well is like there was some friction with him and like the CIA, like how
Mm-hmm.
they operated and how like their interests didn't always align with, like you said, the interests of like Americans and the people. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point that you mentioned how like he grew into like his legacy or his myth. He grew into that. He might not have started
Nope.
with as many like values and goals, but I think like you said, as he like did the job, I think some of these like true values took shape.
And I
Um,
would say that's mostly the case for a lot of presidents. They're not truly ready for the role until they do the role. but that's definitely the case for JFK. He didn't want to be president. Is definitely his father kept pushing him, and at some point JFK just relented. So I think that's part of why he wasn't as ready for the role of president. But once he got into it, and once he started to trust his people, like his brother,
Yeah.
then things kind of turned around for him.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. In terms of going back a little bit, if you say what would have changed if he didn't meet his demise the way he did, I think there would be a lot more government transparency. There would be just the institution, and this was 60 years ago at this point now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the government would, even in 2025, would be a lot more transparent, releasing, to being able to communicate with the general public. Now it's because of his clashing with the intelligence community. I think that was the cause of a lot more secrecy in terms of the current times, and maybe that was a part of why what happened.
So this is where I might veer more into the Chris Corvo territory. I don't think
Yeah.
What, what does that mean?
I don't, I don't think they would have been less secretive. I think they would have been just as secretive with Kennedy if he was alive or not. I just think that they wouldn't have been able to go crazy the way that they did once Kennedy was gone. So I I think people forget how much of a centrist Kennedy was.
Mhm.
I don't think he wanted to upend the government. He didn't want to change things about the government. He just wasn't trustful uh, with the CIA, with the military industrial complex that his predecessor actually talked to Kennedy about. Like Eisenhower and Kennedy, they had talks about how not to trust the Pentagon and not to
Interesting.
trust the CIA. Yeah, they just weird. You would think that predecessor and successor wouldn't talk as much as they did, but they did, and Kennedy was very receptive to it. So yeah, I don't think they would have been. I don't think they would have been as open as you think they would have been. I do
Okay.
think the biggest thing would be that there would be no Vietnam. And so that's another aspect, like the counterculture of that time frame. It was very against the war, and I think Kennedy was, after dealing with the Bay of Pigs and then the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think he didn't want to continue to go down these massive, like crises that he had to go through. So he wanted to focus more on the mission to the moon and dealing with the um, civil rights movement. He didn't want to take the U.S. into another war after the Korean War. So he wanted to pull back from the Vietnam War, and I think that's another aspect that I think that people should talk about. I don't think there would have been a Vietnam War to literally fracture the country the way that it did. I think that was like a backbreaking event in American history that most people don't talk about.
So when was the Vietnam
Yeah.
War?
The Vietnam War, I think, started in like the 1961.
Yeah,
Or
because I'm looking at the Bay
1960. It
of
was
Pigs
early.
was
It's
61.
in the
Yeah.
early 60s. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, he was very much a anti-communist. I mean, that
Mhm.
was
Yeah,
something
He
he
said
ran
it
on,
in Germany. He said it. Yeah.
right? And I mean that. So we had,
And you
co-
alluded to it before with the Nixon debates. They're very
Yeah.
Him and Nixon were very similar. It was just that their appearance were different. Kennedy is definitely a centrist.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to look. So I'm saying Vietnam during his presidency, Kennedy continued policies that provided political, economic, and military support to the South Vietnamese government. Let's see.
You know, he sent advisors over to South Vietnam, but he was very hesitant to send American troop, like full blown American
Yeah,
troops.
because JFK, in terms of a human aspect, he valued American lives a lot, and he didn't want to get involved in like military, like actual combat. He wasn't really down with that.
Yeah, so I'm
And
seeing.
he was
Yeah.
also afraid of starting a greater war with the Soviet Union. As if there's one thing that
Yeah.
you see with the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was very careful not to um, have a misstep where it would cause like a nuclear war. He didn't want
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing on October
Yeah.
11th, 1963, Kennedy signed the NASM 263 ordering the withdrawal of 1,000 military personnel by the end of the year from Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, to your point, yeah, it seemed like he was supporting South Vietnam, the South Vietnamese, but was not intending to try to have like us take
Yeah.
like a massively active role.
Yeah, he was very
Uh,
passive.
Yeah.
yeah, it is kind of interesting. Yeah, because you see, so one data point I'm looking at is that so he before he went into politics, he was a journalist for a short period of time, and he actually I think served as a journalist in the Soviet Union. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, this I have no clue about.
No, Berlin.
Yeah, Berlin.
So
Yeah, that makes
No,
sense.
he was
yes,
cool with the Germans. Yeah.
Yeah.
so it's kind of interesting though. It's like that might have been. It's interesting in Wikipedia. It's a very small section, but it's 1945 because then in 1947 he's in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
But you have to imagine like being a journalist in Berlin at this time of period. You are gonna like that might have been like a formulative experience because
Mhm.
like think about
That's his World
Germany
War
at
II.
that time point, 1945. The war is pretty much over,
Yeah.
I believe.
He was there before, well, not
Right.
before the war, but he was there during. Actually,
Yeah.
he was in Germany before they invaded Poland, so he got to
Interesting.
see,
Yeah.
like the Nazis and their
Oh yeah.
peak.
And then you're at the fall, so now you have half of Germany is now controlled by the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing that. So yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting that like even though he had a very I mean he was like an American prince, it did seem like him and his brother I mean they're
Yeah, they
like
are. That's
American
what I was
Yeah.
royalty.
laughing. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
Fair.
That they did not live in like a glass towers. Like they kind of like got their hands dirty and
Yeah,
were like
correct.
in the world,
Yeah.
which would kind of allow you to then I'm not a common man, but like I get it because like I was in the military. I'm around people. I'm a journalist in like war torn Germany. Like it's gritty. That might have served him in some
That's
respects.
yeah. That gave him an appeal to the everyday man for sure.
And in a way to
Yeah.
actually
And
genuinely
internationally
relate.
as well. Yeah. Exactly.
Genuinely relate to them.
Yeah.
Joe, I'm looking at your questions.
I was actually you just talking about that. I was going to point to the last question that I had.
Yeah, I want thank you because I was curious
Yeah.
what you meant by this. So yeah, talk about that.
So I'm not a fan of globalism. Just in general, I think it leads itself to conflict. But I can understand based his upbringing with his father, his travels in Europe, and then his dealings with the Soviet Union. He became a globalist. He didn't focus as much on domestic policy. He was really more international, a globalist president, and he focused a lot on trying to curb communism and trying to be on the U.S. becoming for the U.S. to become more of a policeman of the world, to try to step in whenever things weren't going the way they should. And I think that ideal is nice, but it's problematic. So that's one of the aspects of JFK that I don't like. And it's kind of ironic because of the whole USAID thing that's going on now. That was actually started by Kennedy. Like
Yeah.
he used the premise of aid to try to influence, try to get the American ideal out into the world so that certain countries didn't fall to communism. So he used that premise to try to pretty much enlarge in the American empire, so to speak.
So let me ask you this question because yeah, I'm looking at his Wikipedia, which Wikipedia, take everything with a grain of salt, but it definitely breaks down like he had a lot of policies in the Congo.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that created the Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
So Vienna, so Berlin, he had a lot of stuff going on.
And he
Cuba.
truly believed in these things. He wanted there to be peaceful organizations to step in and help whenever there's help that was needed. But
So do you go ahead? Sorry.
no, go ahead with the question.
I was just gonna ask you. So do you think his globalist? Because like that was an interesting. Let me actually read your question, just out loud, so because people will know we're on the same point. So Joe asked this question: Was JFK's globalist ideals were shaped by his wartime experience and travel throughout Europe during the buildup to World War II? In hindsight, are you guys in favor of globalism? So JFK was in favor of globalism. I didn't know this. Like that was not something I kind of like knew about. But I'm curious. I want to ask you this question, Joe. Is like, was that specifically because of the communist threat? Like in today's world, the where we live in now, like would he have been as much of a quote unquote globalist? Because all of the things I'm seeing on Wikipedia were like responses or preemptive movements to like
Communism.
to stop communism or to encase an area in communism that was kind of being infected by communism. So like if that was off the table, do you think he would have had the same goals?
I think he would have had the same goals. I think if you look at how he saw poverty, he was very moved and touched by people who were in poverty, and he wanted to try to eradicate that. There's like pictures of him in like Appalachia, like in West Virginia, talking to people who are living in these crazy conditions, and he wanted to help people whenever possible. And it wasn't only in the United States. He wanted to help people across the world. So even if there wasn't a communism, I think he would still try to push these ideals. I don't think he would have been as forceful as he was, but I still think he would have pushed for interventionism in globalist ideals, things like that.
All right, so last thing I want to ask you real quick, and then Rob, hop in. I don't want to hog
Yeah,
anything.
no, go ahead.
But so you know how you mentioned you made that point of like with the '60s countercultural revolution and how like that came out of like essentially like a loss of innocence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think Kennedy in himself embodied like the innocent American optimism himself? And
No,
that,
not only him. I think it was him and his wife. I think.
well, I mean his wife, but like they like, because I would imagine even politically, like after he died, like the American innocent dream, like we're gonna spread democracy and make the world a great place. I feel like that kind of, in some cases, the veneer was washed away with Kennedy. Like he embodied that. I think. Like,
Mhm.
would you agree with that?
Yes. I don't even think in some cases. I think in every way,
Yeah, I think 100%. Yeah,
it died with him.
Mm.
yeah, because now it's like, oh, we're not necessarily the good guys. Like we're, you start to like see that like we're doing things for our own
Self-interest.
reasons.
Mhm.
Yeah, motivations.
And things kept cascading downwards after his assassination.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rob.
So no, let's stay in the 60s. So how I think this all ties in. How integral was he as a figure in the civil rights movement?
So this is
Yeah.
another aspect where I think he wasn't really interested in at first,
All right.
and then he just grew into it. Like I think his MO was this: how could he go into the international realm and say that communism was a bad thing, that the American ideal, democracy and free enterprise, capitalism, are what the whole world should be doing if the United States can't take care of their own problems at home. So he grew into realizing, okay, I need to fix these problems at home before I can actually start talking to, um, just start talking to the Soviet Union, start talking to East Germany. So he realized, okay, we need to fix this problem with segregation, with with all these issues down south. So dealing with the integration of I think it was the University of Mississippi
Yeah,
was like a big deal for him.
the Mississippi riots.
Yeah, I it his response was kind of slow, and that kind of shows to you how he wasn't really as interested at first to the riots, and eventually they sent in the National Guard to kind of quell what happened. But eventually he realized, okay, this needs to be taken care of. So he brought in a whole group of people over like a year time span to try to figure out how can he come up with a bill to curb these issues that are happening all over the country.
Yeah, I didn't realize that he's the one that signed Executive Order 10-10925, which essentially affirmative action.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that
Yeah.
put that into.
Yeah, he did a lot, man.
What else did he do?
But see, the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, I don't think that's and this is the crazy part. It's like the little offshoots of his assassination. I don't think a lot of the stuff would have passed if he was alive. He's
That's
not.
a good.
He's not
There
the
you go.
legislator that Lyndon Johnson was. Lyndon Johnson knew how to fucking get people in line and vote the way he wanted to vote. And
Okay.
JFK wasn't that person.
So do
So-
you think? Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
Sorry, I have a question about Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of what I was seeing, and which actually intrigued me, was if Lyndon Johnson or Nixon were president, then we would have invaded Cuba. So JFK not only see because Johnson is more of a he's less concerned with, I would say, the moral side of it. Maybe that's the great appeal of JFK. I'm trying to get to like the fascination with him, which I
Mhm.
think was one of your questions too. Why was people were crying and distraught
Yeah.
when he was assassinated? He's very much of a like a pro human and pro morals. Maybe that comes from religion, Corvo. Maybe we want to talk about that. No, I'm not. I didn't mean that as a slight.
No, it's not a slight.
No.
I just found it
Maybe
funny.
maybe it's his the upbringing Catholicism, which I also shared, and I could see how you the way you think about just people in general
Mhm.
is completely different than someone who's like a tactician like Johnson was.
Yeah, like a strategist.
Yeah, exactly. And
I
Nixon,
personally,
go ahead.
I
Go.
think it's more so ego. I think Nixon and Johnson, they had
Yeah.
shit ton of ego, and
Okay.
Kennedy didn't have as much of an ego as those two did. So those two in particular, especially Johnson, didn't want to be known as the first president to lose a war on his watch.
Uh-huh.
So that's the thing that they were preoccupied with. They didn't want to have that on their ledger. Kennedy didn't care. He all he thought about was trying to do what he thought was the right thing
Yeah.
for the job, not his legacy.
I like that. I like this. So where does that humility come from? Because he, like Chris said earlier, and both of you, he came from very like wealthy means. Where did all this humility come from?
I think he just grew into it.
All right.
I really do. I think Chris alluded to it before, and I pointed it out. Just his travels overseas.
That
you got to
definitely helps.
see-
Yeah.
You got to see the way people lived outside of the United States, and I think that really shaped him. I think his time in war, like leading people, getting to know like people from all these different backgrounds in the United States, and getting to pull them in adverse conditions. I think that shaped how he thought the world should be. So he got to experience war the way that Johnson and Nixon never did.
Mhm.
Nixon didn't serve, and I think he barely was in the military, if at all. So he got to see everything like firsthand how bad war could be.
That's a
And
good
I
point.
think
Yeah.
that really served him in terms of not being gung ho about trying to invade Cuba. Uh, all the way when it came to the Cuban Missile Crisis, or even when the CIA told him he should invade Cuba for the Bay of Pigs. He didn't want to do that. He actually decided, okay, we're not going to send U.S. troops. We're going to send these little group of Cuban Americans over to the Bay of Pigs, and they're going to be the ones to do the fighting.
Okay.
Yeah, or like essentially they were Cubans who escaped, and now we're like trying to start a new revolution in Cuba.
Yep, the CIA wanted they wanted Kennedy to actually send troops into the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah, and just like lay siege to it. Yeah.
He didn't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I mean, I think one thing that you can't not consider is just the fact that he died young. So he died and that kind of like solidifies his story, right? It's like he never lived long enough to become a villain. Like he never lived long enough to maybe consider, oh, legacy is now important to me, right? Like I think that's something always worth considering. Like a martyr dies before they can, while they're still a martyr. So I think that's one thing. I think that's like in people's like collective imagination, he was like the young, handsome, like well-spoken person that cared for the common man, and like he never, that image never had an opportunity to be tarnished, right? Like who knows if he had lived long enough and a bunch of illegitimate children had popped up and all of his like sexual indiscretions had made it to the papers, if that would have tarnished his legacy, right? Like come on, like that's because we know this is a backstory. Like he was not a faithful husband. In a time where condoms were probably not heavily used, so there might be some Kennedys rolling around that we don't know about. I mean, let's call it.
It's true. He's right. He's dead on balls accurate. Right.
So like that is him too. The man who would cheat on his wife relentlessly and often. Yeah. Right. Who had Marilyn Monroe at his birthday party, who he was sleeping with. So like let's be honest. That's who he was.
There's a part of me that thinks that he was so revered that I think a lot of Americans didn't care.
So what? Some would. Some would. Some still like Clinton. But I think
a majority of Americans wouldn't care.
Maybe, but like Clinton definitely lost some of his appeal by some people who liked him when they found out he had this dalliance in the Oval Office. Not all of them, but you're going to lose some, because for some they're going to be like, that is not. I'm not down for that. Yeah. But I do think some people liked him because he did fit certain categories. Irish, right? I think he's the first Irish American president. I might be wrong. First Catholic, obviously.
Definitely first Catholic.
Yeah. And maybe some other categories that he was kind of I think he was the youngest at that time, the youngest president. So I think some of those qualities were always gonna rocket him to some form of like celebrity, right? Like it goes a long way if you're young, if you speak well, and you look nice, you have a beautiful wife, you have the kids. For a lot of people, I think like there's a lot of Catholics in the world. That might have been just enough. Just that was what kind of like made him their guy.
I think if Jackie divorced him, or if he divorced Jackie, then you would be persona non grata. But that was never going to happen because she was so devoted to him.
Yeah, no. This is a good point, because I think what it boils down to is like Bill Clinton. John F. Kennedy was just cool, man. He was just a cool guy, and people are drawn to that.
But I think the problem with Bill Clinton, he had Hillary, which no one really liked Hillary. Everybody loved Jackie.
Yeah.
And a lot of his scandals before the Lewinsky stuff happened, they're out in the open. That didn't happen with Kennedy. It was a different time, so
the media was different.
Yeah. That's why. And I would hope. I don't think that he was. I don't want to liken him to the Clintons. To his that's to his detriment. I think. I think he had dalliances, but I don't think he was killing anyone, for lack of a better word.
Sky, man.
But yeah.
Flightless Epstein Island, baby.
Oh god!
But you do bring another interesting point, Joe. It's like we do live in a time where social media and the phone, like anytime you're around someone, they could be recording you, and
Oh yeah.
like it is kind of interesting that like imagine Kennedy now. Who
Oh,
knows if he would have, if like take the 60s and just move them forward. Same circumstances are happening, but with our technology, it might have been different because there's probably a lot of conversations, there's probably a lot of videos and photographs that, if came to light, would definitely have changed people's perspective on this guy. But anyway, go ahead.
yeah, I think
What are
that's
some
true.
final things we didn't hit the assassination. I mean, do you
We
want to
should,
cover that in the last few
yeah.
minutes?
What else do we have? We did civil rights, yeah. But so the Bay of Pigs, yeah, I think you're right, Joe. I think if it was Nixon or Johnson, we're good. It's
Invasion.
a war.
Easy,
It's an
yeah.
invasion.
Invasion. Nope.
Yeah, yeah.
Not without a doubt.
So what do you think about? Yeah, let's do the assassination. What happened? Give us your uh,
Yeah, Joe, give
take
us yours.
on what
I'd like to hear
happened
yours.
in Dallas.
So I personally just think it was a lone gunman. I think it was just Oswald.
I don't know about that one.
I know. I trust me. That's why I think there's going to be a little debate
Yeah.
that pops up here.
Yeah.
But I think Oswald became radicalized partly because of the his travels to the Soviet Union. Also, him being from the South, he thought that the U.S. shouldn't really dabble in states' affairs. I think Oswald was because he was just a already disturbed person who kind of latched onto someone who thought was ruining the he thought he was ruining America, and he felt that he needed to take him out. Now, the weird part, and this is where I do agree, like the bullet, like how
His head moved.
it, but not only that, but just the way that it hit him, and then the governor of Texas, Connolly, how one bullet could do all of that is kind of crazy. I
Yeah.
Is
So
it that to me that's the questionable part about the whole assassination.
yeah,
I
it's
still do believe it was just Oswald and just him alone. He was in the military. He had the capability to do all this stuff, but just that bullet is just weird. It's weird as hell.
so the like the after effects of the bullet wound is that's the tricky part for you.
Yeah, it tore up like Kennedy, and then it passed on to Connolly, and it tore him up too. Like how would one bullet do all that damage?
Mhm.
It's crazy to me.
So you don't think, even not if there was just multiple people involved, you don't think Oswald was
I,
talking with any
no,
agencies?
no, I
So he
wouldn't be.
just did it on his own.
I
I don't
think
know
he
about
did it
that.
on his own,
I disagree with that.
or he was manipulated to do it, but not knowing he was manipulated.
How, like MK Ultra style? The serious question. He's like some military brainwashing.
I I don't know if I could go that far.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have. I've listened to a lot of the assassination stuff. I don't really have a strong opinion. What I do find interesting is just the fact of like why why there is so many questions, because there have been other assassinations even in our life, or attempted assassinations, and like why is there so much questioning around
Sorry.
um around his particular assassination? Because I mean, 60 years. How many years is it? This is when did this happen? This happened.
63.
Yeah. So
1963.
think about how many years have passed since then, and it's still a question mark. That to me is the most interesting. Just like, why do people? Is it that they're just like they can't understand why anyone would kill him? They can't understand that one person would kill him. Go ahead, Rob. I know you know you've done deeper dives on this
Yeah,
subject.
this is better. So I think the angle, you got to look at like let's even get into the mathematics of it. The angle, the way his head moves. There's multiple people, Joe. There's more than one.
But still, do
And-
you think if there's multiple people, is it essentially still like he has just people helping him, or is it a deeper?
That's a good question.
That's I think where I'm more
I
curious about.
think he was part of a covert operation. This is gonna be wild, but he was part of a covert operation spearheaded by the intelligence community of the United States, specifically because they were feuding at the time, and they didn't. And that's why I was going back to what I said earlier. The transparency of the government. I think they wanted to nip that in the bud, because if Kennedy set that precedent where the government was always super open and communicating with the public, that's not what they want. They wanted to be able to control the narrative. So that's my view on that. That it wasn't just Oswald, Joe. Come on, man. You can't believe that.
I do believe that. I do think that Jack Ruby coming out of nowhere and shooting Oswald definitely didn't make the situation any better.
Yeah, well, the second part of it, if we didn't even get into that.
Yeah, just that part.
So Jack
makes it
Ruby is an
even
American
worse.
nightclub owner,
Yeah, he murdered
had a gun.
Oswald.
ready to go. Didn't take him out. I don't know.
People didn't get any answers. They didn't get answers from Oswald in terms of why he did or didn't do
He
it.
knew too much. That's why.
If Ruby didn't kill him, I think there would be a little bit less of speculation in terms of what actually happened. But
I mean, it's
Ruby going in there and just straight up assassinating Oswald made that whole situation a lot murkier.
yeah. I mean, think about the whole shooting of Donald Trump. Like that is still wrapped in mystery.
what
Like,
happened
There's a
there?
lot of details there that have not gone explained. I do think it is kind of interesting though. I think our imaginations always go towards there has to be some powers that be.
Yeah,
that's
'cause it's more fun.
orchestrating.
More
yeah,
fun
and
to
in
think
reality,
about
it's
it
like
than-
there are people who just get an idea in their head
it's fair.
and have enough intelligence to go out. Like you think we live in a world where like we feel safe, but reality is that like most of us have like quote unquote signed a social contract where we just all accept it. Like I'm not going to try to kill you and you're not going to try to kill me.
Yeah, the honor system.
Right? I mean that's it. But you go
Yeah.
to the subway, if there was someone who just like they're like no, I didn't sign that contract. I wanted to kill you. Like you're defenseless. I mean, it's
Right.
kind of a crazy thing that more people don't die, and it's just sheerly because the majority of people are like live and let live. Like I got my stuff to do, you do your thing.
Yeah.
But if there's a wolf out there who doesn't, who decides, I want to do some mayhem, like you guys live in New York, it would be very easy, right? Like how many?
Yeah,
if a
but
person went
hold
onto
on.
a subway with a gun, how many people who could he kill or she kill?
Dozens.
Before someone tried to stop them.
Dozens. Yeah. It
Many.
would be sad.
Man.
Yeah.
So I think
So-
that's why when you see the assassinations, it's like this must be like a deeper conspiracy because who would do it? And it's in reality, it's like, well, it's not that hard. I got a gun. I know how to shoot the gun. I got to post up at a certain spot.
Yeah,
Apparently it's
no,
not
but
as difficult as you think.
no, I hear it, but I disagree because this was an execution.
No,
This was way different.
I mean, I
This is
agree.
high level execution.
I mean, I agree that there's definitely some stuff with the Kennedy, just because there's so many people who have skills and knowledge who have investigated it and have concluded that at the very least,
It's dodgy.
like the
yeah.
narrative is not accurate. Like
Yeah.
there's at least some other stuff going on.
It also doesn't help that his brother also got assassinated like years later.
Yeah,
and then his son dies in like a
in a
plane crash.
plane crash.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of like
Yeah, and there was like speculation that he was going to run for office.
yeah.
Whether it was like New York senator.
Yeah, he was going to run for Senate. He was going to be Chuck Schumer. And
Oh God,
Yeah, so I
you
mean,
don't
it's
like Chuck? You don't like the
No.
Chuckster?
I hate him.
very interesting.
Yeah, but also, Chris, the assassin was murdered
Yeah,
as well.
Oh yeah,
Come
no, I
on.
mean
Yeah.
you're clearing up all.
You're
Well, I mean,
tying
same
up
thing
all
with
the
the Trump
loose
thing, right?
Yeah,
That guy, the kid, who we don't understand how he has these abilities.
he's gone.
BlackRock commercial, shoots this guy. is killed very quickly. His
You
body's
said the key
cremated
word there.
immediately. So there's
Yeah.
literally
Okay.
nothing that you can do any type of diagnostic
They
on.
did a professional cleansing of his house.
His apartment has
Nothing.
completely sterilized.
Yeah.
Like the fact that like this just kind of went under the carpet and no one talks about it anymore is absurd.
Yeah. It is crazy.
There's a lot
It's-
more question marks probably with that assassination than maybe even the JFK assassination.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, Chris. Because why did the Louis Mangione thing? Who I still got my fingers on the pulse of that one. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. Why did a documentary on Hulu come out immediately 2 days later? But this kid we know nothing about.
That's a very good point.
What the hell is going on?
That's a very good. And also, it's kind of crazy to think about how did they have what? How do you put out a documentary in like 2-3 days?
It's crazy.
Like that takes footage, B-roll. Where did you get all this?
You got to
stuff?
interview people and shit.
The amount of shenanigans that I think is happening in the world, because like when you start to ask questions like that, like to make a documentary, it's 2 hours. Let's say it's an hour and a half.
Days after.
How much content do you need to make that? A lot. You need a lot of
Yeah.
content. You need video content. You need photographs. You need. Who's writing all of this stuff?
I
Like,
know.
how did this happen so quickly?
Okay, it sounds like we need a Luigi episode.
I see. I don't even want to delve too much into him because it's like
Let's wait for the trial
yeah,
first.
I mean, I think that's going
Later.
to be very interesting. I don't know.
And he's getting fan letters.
Yeah.
People want to do conjugal
I mean,
visits. Women love him. I'm serious.
Of
It's-
trends,
I know.
like that to me is like the more dangerous of trends. Like OnlyFans is nothing up to this guy because like what happens if people
the
see that this
obsession
guy,
with killers. Yeah.
if this guy becomes famous, there's someone else who's gonna be like,
If-
oh, I can do that now. Like, let me go do that.
This
There's
is
you know
true.
you see a pattern.
Facts.
Just like with influencers, one does one thing, and someone sees, oh, it worked out. I'm gonna
Yeah,
do
and
that.
then you even go over the top. You gotta
Yes,
outdo them.
correctly. It's going to
Yeah.
become like the purge.
Yeah.
I don't want to live in that world. All right,
Yeah.
folks, we're beginning to digress. Joseph,
That was a good end, though. That's a good
any
end.
final things you wanted to say about Kennedy before we hang up this episode?
Wait, so like, what's your overall take on JFK?
He's my second favorite president.
Yeah,
Period.
is he a top tier?
Yeah,
Who's your
Who's
first?
number one?
FDR. No
Okay.
question.
Yeah, the New Deal. You're a New
yeah,
Deal guy.
Yeah, if anyone knows me and the things that I stand for, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is
He was cool.
my
He was cool.
favorite guy.
Very
But,
interesting.
I like Teddy too. He was a nature guy. He loved
was-
nature.
He was
like
a
Teddy.
man of his time, but he also had problems too.
Oh
He's more of an empire guy too, which I fucking hate. I can't stand that shit. But he loved trust busting and
and he loved the environment.
yes.
Yeah.
But Kennedy he's my second favorite president, even though he's had just a short time frame, just a little under 3 years being president. But a lot of his legacy was kind of pushed forward through because of Johnson, so I think that helps. But yeah, Kennedy. He had a big legacy that I don't think he cared that much for in the grand scheme of things of being president. I don't think you become a president and not think about legacy. But when you think about all the modern presidents, I think he lived more for the moment instead of trying to think about what's going to happen in the future if he does this, and this.
I dig
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
I'm
All right,
a JFK
folks.
guy
You're a
too.
JFK guy?
Yeah, I like him.
All right. Dig it. Ladies and gents, this is another episode of the Draxx Life. We'll catch you again next Friday. I'm not sure what we'll be talking about, but it should be something interesting. I don't think, Joe, you won't be with us, right?
Yeah, it won't be. I think the next 2 weeks.
All right. Well, we'll wait
But
with bated breath until you
I should
return.
He's gonna be on camera,
live
though.
with video. Yes.
Ooh,
I'm
nice.
holding you,
Everyone
you
will
bet.
get to see your face.
Finally, for the love of God.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, folks.
All right.
Have a good night. Peace.
Latest.